Hey, 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 and welcome to Leadershipisation, all things leadership. I was speaking to a client recently, someone who's a leader, and what they said to me was this. They said, look, I don't know, Beth. I don't know, but it seems that I'm getting more and more involved again with my team. And I thought I'd move past that. Like I feel like I'm micromanaging them all over again, and I hate it. I don't want to be doing that. And the really interesting thing was this: nothing had actually gone wrong. Nothing had gone wrong. The team was capable, the plan was pretty solid. However, things had become a little unclear. The work had become a little messy. And without realizing it, we were able to identify for my client that without realizing it, they were checking more, they were correcting more, they were asking more questions. They weren't really very curious questions. And they were stepping back into the decisions that they'd handed over. And what we were able to determine for this client was that control didn't start because they didn't trust their team. Their controlling, their stepping into their micromanaging started because clarity had just quietly started to dissipate. I'm Beth Bergen. I'm a global leadership and communication coach and speaker. Join me today as we unpack why leaders take back that control and what it costs. I've got 5 talking points and 2 powerful tools to share with you that I know you can implement straight away, and some reflection questions. Let's look at the first talking point. Our brain hates ambiguity, and leaders react to that. Our brain hates ambiguity. Look, our brain, and we could do a whole nother session about how awesome our brain is. But basically, our brain defaults to what it knows best. It defaults to keeping us safe. And ambiguity actually increases that cognitive load. So it's much more likely just to return to where it was. So when we have unclear expectations, when that's what our brain is perceiving, we activate that kind of threat response. We activate that part of us that goes, oh, okay, I want to go back to what I know. And when there are no clear outcomes for our team to achieve, that kind of leads us to a little bit of concern. And then we start to get really testy, and it can come into full-blown anxiety. And that's why we often return to that control, because that's safe. It soothes, it soothes that anxiety. Yeah, it soothes the anxiety. So that whole micromanagement thing might just be a nervous system response. It's our brain wanting to keep us safe. It's a nervous system response. Much rather that, and let's accept that it's not actually a character flaw. It's a response to what's going on. And this is one of the ways, this micromanaging and stepping back into that control is one of the ways that we cope. Our brain returns us to what it knows. It's also one of the ways that we sabotage ourselves, but that is also a whole new conversation for another time. So, point 2, control. Control for many of us feels safer than actually trusting that ambiguity. We're not quite sure what's going on. And clarity can be equated to the competence that people demonstrate. When there's no clarity, then potentially there's no competence. And so, as a leader, what we do is step in to restore one or both of those. We want to restore the clarity or we want to restore the competence, because clarity brings competence. Yeah. Now, what's really difficult for many of us is that it takes a real emotional tolerance to sit with ambiguity. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what role we play in an organization, whether we're the leader, whether we're the leader of the whole organization, whether we're leading a team, whatever it might be, whatever our role might be, we're never going to eliminate ambiguity completely. And that's okay, because one of the important leadership intelligence tools is that the higher your tolerance is, the easier it is for you to clarify strategically what's going on. When you've got that strategic clarification, your tolerance is likely to be higher. Now, what many of us do is we shift to that control, to that micromanaging, rather than taking the time to do some of the things that we're going to talk about in these next 3 points. Yeah, we may have the self-awareness to understand, yeah, I'm just going to fix this. We don't then take that next step to actually saying, you know what, I'm going to actually get rid of as much of the ambiguity as I possibly can. So let's keep moving. Number 3, vague outcomes create reactive leadership. This is what I was just referring to. Like, this comes back to us in our leadership role. We actually have to be making sure that we've got serious, clear outcomes. Because if what we're saying is, do your best, that's not clarity. Keep me posted, that's not clarity. Let's aim for high quality, that's not clarity. But these are the kinds of statements that we use all the time. I'm sure you've used them. I certainly know that I have. But what we need to have as a leader, we need to have defined outcomes. We need to have clearly thought through the boundaries of decisions and what the decision rights are, who gets to make them. We've got to have worked out what our non-negotiables are. And we also have to clearly understand what are the intervention or escalation triggers. Because otherwise, you will default to that reactive correction and control. Otherwise, you will default to the reactive correction and control. Now, you might be sitting there going, no, I won't, no, I won't. Yes, you will. Because when you've got that weak structure, you need to have lots of supervision. Your supervision, the control that you're demonstrating, excuse me, rubbing my eye, the control that you're demonstrating, the amount of supervision you have to give your team is going to be way up high, because you haven't defined the outcomes, you haven't sorted out where the decision boundaries are, who's got the rights, you haven't worked out those kinds of things. The fourth point for us to have a look at that flows naturally on from that is this. Defining decision rights, that decision rights are the most overlooked form of clarity in any team. This is where, there's huge muddle ups. Teams or individuals, if you're tasking an individual with something, but either the team or an individual, they need to know these things. They need to know what they can decide independently. Be really clear about that. They need to know what requires consultation. Be really clear about that. They need to know what requires your approval. Be really clear about that. Now, if you don't know, they don't know because you haven't told them. And if you've got the slightest bit of hesitation, so the higher your hesitation, the more obvious your hesitation becomes, go straight back into that controlling leadership because your hesitation spills out to them. So what you need is almost like a decision architecture. And when you have that decision architecture, there's not going to be that confusion about authority. Now, we've talked a lot about these kinds of things over the last few weeks. We talked, so you can go back and have a look at those, some of those leadershipizations, because they're really, we're heading on the same point here. And it's all about you as a leader. It's about your self-awareness. It's about your willingness to identify, hey, maybe I'm not so awesome at these kinds of things. Maybe I need to do something about this. So your own self-awareness and your willingness to grow as a person and a leader is where the change will come from. The fifth point I want to look at or talk to is this one. Providing clarity, it's a leadership skill. It's an important tool in your leadership intelligence toolbox. It's a really important tool. Why? Well, the higher the clarity is, the more likely you are to define outcomes rather than tasks. The higher the clarity is, the more likely you are to establish some success metrics. The higher the clarity is, the more likely you are to have predetermined and set in the check-in rhythm. Check in with me once a week, 15 minutes, let's put it in our calendar. The higher the clarity, the more likely you are to remove unnecessary approval layers. Because a whole lot of those decisions that we're making, those approvals that we're making, could potentially be given to someone else. However, if as a leader we've failed to establish that clarity from the very start, we're never going to do that. Because when we have low clarity, we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to everybody else. And work looks messy and we keep on having to micromanage. When you have clarity from the start about some of the things that we talked about today, a whole lot less control is going to be needed in the medium and the long term because you're building the capacity of your team. You're building the capability of your team. Yeah, we've talked about low clarity a lot over the last few weeks. So as I said before, go back and have a look at them. Now, let's look at two tools that we can give you, two leadership intelligence tools that you can use straight away. Now, someone said to me the other day, God, they're really weird names that you give these things. What you got to give them something. So I apologize if you think the name's a bit weird. It's just a matter of let's come up with a name. This will do it. Okay. So the first one is called an outcome clarity test. Before you assign a task to someone else, a person or a team, answer these questions. And you probably should have these on your wall somewhere. What specifically does success look like? Now, we don't ask ourselves that enough. We just think, oh yeah, we'll know when it's done. Maybe we've won money for a project and there are some quite strict criteria about what it's going to look like or what it must look like. So what specifically does success look like? The second one is, what does done mean? What does done mean? How are we going to know that it's done? Now, that's a simple sort of a question, but it's got a lot that sits under it. And if you don't have clarity, it's going to make it hard for you to answer this. The third one is, what decisions are inside the scope? What decisions are inside the scope? So if you can't answer those three questions in a maximum of 3 sentences, it's not ready to delegate yet. I'm very serious. That's why I'm keeping a straight face, right? If you can't answer those three questions in 3 simple sentences, it's not ready to delegate yet. And that's a bit scary because most of us would be going, oh, yeah, off you go. You'll get it. Read this. You're good to go. And then we wonder why our team isn't doing very well and we have to step in and micromanage them all over again because the work kind of got a bit messy. Okay, tool 2 is called a decision map reset. Think about one project. Think about one part of your work. And this might be something that you are giving a manager to do or a team leader to do. It might be something that you're giving an individual to do or a whole team to do. And when you think about that project, make yourself a list of all of the decision points. And then look at that list and think about it from this perspective. Which ones truly require your approval? Which ones truly require your approval? Now, notice there that I've said require, not must have, should have, will have. Which ones truly require your approval? You should be able to knock some of those off and remove yourself from one layer of that. And then what you can do is communicate to your team really clearly with clarity. You've got the authority here. Escalate to me only if this happens. How do we know what this is? We know what this is because we've spent the time getting that clarity before we handed it over. There's some work here for you to do about your leadership and your communication style. I'm not letting you off lightly. Clarity reduces your anxiety as a leader almost immediately. Because if you don't know, they don't know. You can't tell them something that you don't know. It's a really important point. Okay, let's move on to the deep reflection questions now. I've got 2 of those today. The first one is this: where in my leadership am I controlling because expectations were never explicitly defined? Now, this might be a real eye-opener for you because you could be thinking, Beth, everywhere. No wonder I'm exhausted. No wonder I'm feeling as though I need to get rid of this team and get a new team. I'm not actually explaining these things with enough clarity. I'm not defining them. And as a result, I'm controlling. So really dig deep into that one. And as you know, ask the question, write down the answers, go away, come back to it. And what else? And what else? So that you can get closer to the truth. So where in my leadership am I controlling because expectations were never explicitly defined? The second question is this one: what part of uncertainty do I struggle to tolerate, and how does that show up in my behavior? Now, we talked before about having that emotional tolerance to ambiguity. So this is a question that relates to that. What part of uncertainty or ambiguity do I struggle to tolerate? And how does that show up in my behavior? Might be that you come rushing in, that it's full of drama, that you um, shift and you get in there and you think, I'll do it myself. It would be easier. Yeah. Maybe what you do is you give them so much information that it's confusing for them. That's just as controlling, just controlling in a different way. So, what we're looking for here is for you to be honest and to build that self awareness. Yeah, that's what's really important here. So, what are our key takeaways? Well, control is a symptom of that ambiguity in the structure. It's not a personality thing. Yeah. No, it's, and the more you control, like it will get embedded, it will become part of who you are. But what we know is that there's a positive side to controlling behavior. And then there's the part where you overuse it and it absolutely sabotages you. So control is a symptom of that structural ambiguity, not personality. The higher the clarity, the lower the anxiety, and the lower the micromanagement. That's just a given. What a great takeaway. And then also, growing as a leader requires this defined decision architecture, not more supervision. You don't need to be giving more and more and more supervision. They're great takeaways. But the real leadership question isn't, why isn't my team stepping up? It's actually, well, sometimes it's, where have I made clarity harder than it needs to be? And if that question is sitting with you after today, that's a useful place to begin a deeper leadership and communication question. It's a great place. And if you'd like to have a conversation about how to create more clarity, less control, and more capacity in your leadership, there's a link. It's in the chat on the platform that you're watching this in. There's a link for a call to me. And I'd really enjoy exploring that with you. So reach out if you need to. Thank you so much for being here today. If you've got questions or comments, please pop them on the platform that you're watching this on, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. If you're watching a replay, love it for you to put hashtag replay. Thank you. I'll see you next week. Bye now.